Hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. I'm Seth.
And I'm Zach.
And I'm Brent.
And we are the Classic Gaming Brothers and Brent.
Happy to be here.
Happy to have you here.
Yes, extremely happy to have you here. Welcome to the studios. It's clean. We've cleaned up since our last guest. We've had some previous guests on the show that have left the studios in some disrepair.
We also burned it down by accident, so
Not the entire, like, it was like a microwave fire, not like a serious fire.
Yeah.
You say burned it down like the entire building's been destroyed. Anyway, thank you. Yes, welcome to our Brent episode, and or as he's known as Goobertown Hobbies.
Yeah, that's me. So I am otherwise known as a YouTuber who paints mini figurines for D&D and Warhammer and those kinds of things. But I also do play video games, and so I think we can have a good chat here.
We primarily reached out to have you on our show for your
Trying to say dulcet tones?
Dulcet, there we go. I can't pronounce things today. I told Zach when he's like, who's this guy? I was like, he's the Bob Ross of miniature painting.
That is the comment I get on my YouTube videos more than any other, I would say. Which is, hey, if you're going to be known for something, that's fine.
Great.
That's fine. I once got the white Morgan Freeman of miniature painting, and then kind of in between and popular, every once in a while I get the Mr. Rogers of mini painting. But yeah, I try to run a chill YouTube channel. I paint figurines for fantasy and sci-fi, and when I'm not doing that, I play video games. So I think we've got some stuff in common here. We can get along.
Before we get into the show itself, as Brent mentioned, he does have his YouTube channel, Goobertown Hobbies. You're also involved in a couple of other podcasts.
Yes, I am. So I'm part of a couple that I do regularly, and not just guest in, but I have Paint Bravely, the podcast I do with another guy, which is about painting miniatures, and every couple of weeks we get together and ramble about painting. And then I am also a member of the latest season of the 20-Sided Realms, which is a D&D real play podcast.
Fun.
Very cool.
4 players, a DM. The DM is especially talented. A couple of the players are very talented. I'm kind of the weak link, but I'm there for marketing, and I try to hold my own as best I can, but it's a lot of fun.
What are you playing?
So I am a sorcerer.
Ooh, fun.
Just about to level up to level 2, but my backstory is that I'm a teenage schoolboy, kind of a trickster, a prankster, on a bit of a school break right now because somebody burned down the school, and so skip town for a little while they're investigating what kind of wildfire sorcery might have lit up the school and gotten a little bit out of control. So Chaz is hanging out in Waterdeep and making new friends while they rebuild the school. So we'll see how that turns out for him.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
That's the 20-Sided Realms. 20-Sided Realms. Tell your friends.
And all of the places you can find Brent will be in our show notes, so you guys can seek it out. And we recommend giving him a follow and a like and a subscribe and a bell and all those YouTube and podcast things that you can do.
Nice.
You said you've played video games, so what have you been playing recently, Brent?
Most recently, it's been Warhammer 2 Total War. So I know you had me on here to talk about the Total War series, and in the show notes here, I wrote down like the games I was most likely to play in the lead up to this episode. You know, this year I've certainly played a lot of XCOM Enemy Unknown. I've played Minecraft, played some Diablo 2 Remastered, and played a little bit of the old Close Combat, the World War II game.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
But in terms of what did I play this week, I played like a solid day of dwarfs in Warhammer Total War 2. So
we'll get into Total War. I have some interesting feelings about Total War, as we'll cover in this podcast.
All right.
You'll find out that I'm just a very bad Total War player. I do love XCOM. Have you played from the original XCOM?
No. I did go back and listen to your episode on the XCOM series, and the original XCOM games sound really brutal, and I'm like vaguely aware of some of the game features that they added to make the missions a little less tedious. Like there's once you're like exploring the map and trying to figure out where the last 2 aliens are or whatever, in the recent games they added a little sound effect. It pings you. They're like, okay, they're you're on the left side of the fog of war. You need to go left to wipe out the last two aliens. But from what I've heard in the original games, similarly very high difficulty level.
Oh yeah.
And then there's just little like quality of life features that aren't there. Like you're just exploring the wrong areas of the map, like sneaking around, afraid they're gonna pop out of nowhere and permanently wipe out your squad.
Yeah.
Spent a lot of time the Marines will be just freaking out because the aliens are around, and when they freak out they shoot other Marines, and it's just disaster zone pretty much from the get-go.
They kept that in the recent games, and there are some very frustrating things that they did keep in the recent games, but that's for me, that's just the right level of difficulty, just the right amount of anger that I can feel at the aliens to get me to keep playing and get really happy when I do, just waste them.
So, Zach, what have you been recently been playing?
Recently, I've been getting into games that I would have played as a child if I did own them, but I didn't play. So, primarily these are like licensed games that score really badly, but I definitely would have owned it if I was a child and knew it existed. So the game in particular I've been playing is Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events for the PC, which was released in 2004 and is a tie-in game with the movie that came out of the same name based on the books of the same name. This game was developed by No Wonder, who also worked on the Harry Potter games for the PC, though it was distributed by Activision, not EA. I did actually play a Lemony Snicket game for the GameCube as a kid, but I never knew there was a PC game. It is entirely different because it's a whole different company doing it. It actually plays a lot like the Harry Potter games. It has the vocal talents of Jim Carrey, Emily Browning, and Liam Aiken reprising their roles from the movie as Count Olaf, Violet Baudelaire, and Klaus Baudelaire, respectively. And Tim Curry, Gabriel Knight, is in it as the narrator. So we have Tim Curry doing the voice of Lemony Snicket. It's a bad game. I'm like mostly through it already. I probably put in an hour so far. It's just kind of like beat to beat of what happens in the movie, but you just have stupid puzzles you have to solve. So you have to figure out where like things are hidden in this room, and they're hidden obviously behind paintings or behind the door that is locked. So it's your average fare for what most like the demographic would be playing it. It's kind of interesting to kind of revisit these games that I definitely know for a fact I would have played the crap out of this game as a kid. I probably would have replayed it like 100 times, but kind of seeing this now from a perspective of like, it's probably good that I did pass on this because it's not very good, but it's the game I've been playing.
Did they reuse the basilisk? Because there's snake.
There is a snake. I haven't gotten to that point yet, but I'm actually in that section right now, so I'm about like halfway through the game because I'm in the reptile room section. It'd be funny if they just like scaled down the basilisk from Harry Potter for the snake.
Just inserted it into the game.
They've definitely reused sound effects. Like I'm catching like every now and then I'm like, oh, that's from the Harry Potter game. Oh, that's from the Harry Potter game. So I think they just kept like one folder of sound, like a sound library, and they're just like, that's good for a rat sound. We'll use the imp from Harry Potter,
Dobby squealing.
Dobby sounds, we'll use that for something.
So recently I've been playing...
Oh yes, Seth, please tell.
Thank you. Norman's Night In, which is a fun puzzle game that I saw at PAX, I want to say in 2020 or 2019. Well, I guess maybe it was the 2019 because it came out in October 23rd of 2019. And it is a puzzle game where you're an older man who likes bowling and there gets a bowling ball and then goes into this world where he is then propelled by the bowling ball to places. So you can choose the color of bowling ball, either red, blue, or green, and it becomes like a mystical orb that you hold, and then you can use your mouse and you can drag the ball towards the edge of the screen, and then you can fling the ball at the guy and he flies through the game. You can't move beyond that mechanism, so you have to use the series of flinging physics of the ball hitting him, and you have to kind of use that and maneuver it around so that you can kind of get him up onto things that he like higher levels, or get him past like falling objects in the background can interact interact with you. It's fun. It's a nice puzzler game. I really wanted it to come out on the cell phone because it looks like a really fun game to play mobilely, but it never did. But it was on sale because Steam had their autumn sale, and it was one of the games that I picked up during their autumn sale.
Oh, we're getting real close to the Steam winter sale. That's the thing about the Steam autumn sale and the winter sale. They're real close together. Yeah.
So I've been playing the Norman's Night In. It's a fun night in, as it were. So as we've mentioned at the top of the show, this is primarily about Total War, which is a war strategy game. We brought Brent on to since he is an accomplished wargamer and a painter of wargaming figures. We can at least say you're an accomplished painter of wargaming figures, at least, right? So we thought that you could talk about Total War.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. So, I go back to some games over and over and over, some series over and over. And the Total War series is one that it might be the highest on my list of like total time played. No, I mean, if we're just going total time played, I'm sure it's still World of Warcraft. But if we exclude that monstrosity, total time played in my life goes to the Total War series. It kind of has two components in each game. There's the big campaign map, which is, kind of like Civilization or any of the other 4X games where you start as like a city or a province, and then you send out your scouts and your armies, and you conquer your neighbors, and you expand and you expand and you expand. But the big difference between Civilization and the Total War series is that every time armies meet in this game, it switches to not exactly a mini game, but it's like the second component of the game of you zoom into that battle, and then you're the general in that battle, and all of the units that you've taken the time to recruit and train up and equip and everything, you get to fight with those units against whatever you allowed your enemies to bring to that fight. The game sets it up that each army can have 20 units, and a unit might be 100 swordsmen or spearsmen or archers, or 40 or 50 cavalry, or a unit might be a couple of trebuchets or ballistas or something like that. So part of the game is figuring out how to make an army of 20 units or less that can kind of compete with a lot of what you might find an enemy bring into the field. And then it's a tactical game from there on out of trying to win that battle, and then as a bonus, if you can win it without losing too many of your men, that'd be great, because then you'll still have whatever's left over available for you on the strategy map after you win that battle. And if you don't win that battle, you save scum until you do win that battle. Yeah.
I know I own Total War games, and I'm pretty sure I own at least two, because I got the Warhammer one, because I like Warhammer, and I'm pretty sure I played a Rome one. I actually own like 7, I guess.
There you go.
I have 0 game time in a lot of them, and this is because I'm very bad at Total War. So I definitely have had moments where I've been like, I'm going to play Total War. Like, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to start playing. I do the first part where you're like building up your units and you're zoomed out and you're like deciding where you want to go. And then I get to the battling part, and that's past the tutorial is kind of where my skill kind of falls apart, and I just lose a lot. Do you need to have a specific way that your brain is wired to approach these games, or is it your strategy mindset? Like, where do you think that comes from?
That's a good question. I think there's obviously a little bit of a learning curve there, going from the Rome setting to medieval to Warhammer. Like, a lot of them have the same basic tactics of you probably want a line of troops to hold the line, and then some archers behind them, maybe some cavalry on the flanks. And I'm actually wondering if you just started on the wrong Total War, because Empire is the one Total War game that's mostly gunpowder. So Empire and Napoleon. Pretty much all the others are, we'll call them like Iron Age kind of combat of swords and shields and spears and bows and horsemen, whereas Napoleon has a lot of cannon fire and grape shot. And I'm just imagining you like walking into just a field of grape shot and then all your guys running away. I don't know, I can't say that's what happened in your past, but I'm wondering if maybe that's just what completely turned you off the entire series.
I'm sure it probably happened at one point in time. I don't think I wouldn't say that I'm turned off. I possess a lot of games, and I tend to have these like spurts where I play like one game a lot for a little bit, and then I go to another game. Time is very finite. I feel like you have to really like Total War to play a lot, like, because it does feel like a game to me that needs some level of time commitment.
I know that my own Steam library is definitely way less than half of my games have any playtime at all. So I think, we've got a lot of commonality there. There's definitely a learning curve on every game, and so you do gravitate a lot of times to the ones you know something about. And I think that may be part of the reason why I keep coming back to this series, is because each game in the series does have enough of the DNA from the previous games that you can get into it pretty quick. I mean, there's tons of differences and, little tweaks on the campaign maps. I mean, first off, it's a different campaign map every time, whether you're in the Mediterranean or the Japanese islands or wherever. But also there's just, different elements to the tech trees and all that stuff. Like, there's a ton of differences, but at the same time, it's that same basic format of you play a game of Civilization, but when the armies meet, you have a fight. And there's that little bit of knowledge that you build up over time about the basics of how those fights work and whether you should be charging this unit or not, or whether that makes any sense at all or is likely to succeed based on your past experience.
I don't personally, for me, I've often found war games, I don't know why, but I found them to be kind of daunting. I think just from like screenshots and stuff like that, whenever I see them. It's just weird because I've always been into real-time strategy games, so I'm really into Age of Empires, really into Warcraft, Starcraft, but I've always found Total War or Warhammer and stuff to be like somewhat more complex for some reason. What do you think a good place for someone like me to start into the series would be if I really wanted to play like Total War or something like that?
I think the best advice is just go with the, time period that interests you the most. So my history with the series is I happened to start around the time that Rome Total War was out, the first Rome Total War. Which is, I think, around the time that the series started getting really, really popular. That's one of the best games in the series. And then after Rome, they had Medieval 2 Total War, which was also very good. And then Empire, because it was like all line infantry of, the redcoats standing and shooting at the Frenchmen, was interesting twist on the formula. But it was kind of the same but different. Empire's a little bit of an outlier, fun in its own way. Empire is also very confusing because you were also sending ships out to the East Indies and out to the West Indies, and you were trying to create an empire across the entire world. And so Rome and Medieval, those games, the campaign map was centered around the Mediterranean.
Right.
It was Europe plus a little bit of Africa plus a little bit of the Middle East. But then Empire Total War was that, but you could also go to the Americas and start trouble, or you could go to India and start trouble, or you could set up trading ships in several other places. So come to think of it, if Empire in some ways is a very bad place to try to enter the series, because there's definitely some extra complexity there.
So I won't start at Empire then. I'll pick somewhere else.
Hey, that's where I started.
So Rome 1 had a remaster, I think this year, and I did spend a solid weekend playing it, and it was great to expand things out from the 800 by 600 pixels or whatever it had been before to my nice computer screen. Yeah, no, that was great. That was...
Don't have to break out the CRT to play it.
Right.
So there's Empire Total War and the Napoleon Total War. Then they came out 2009 and 2010. And like you said, they were both involving muskets, but they were in the traditional style of fighting with that type of technology. So it was very much like it's a line and order. It's prior to essentially the Americans fighting dirty. It's really just like, we're going to storm out and then you're going to storm out and we're just going to shoot at each other, right?
So in some ways it worked. So for most of the games, the way the combat works is a unit of fighters is a block of infantry or a block of bowmen. It's a rectangle. And so in some ways that actually worked pretty well with the musketry of lining up in maybe like longer, thinner blocks of infantry. But you're still lining up and positioning units on the battlefield like that. And so in some ways that works out pretty well. But it just turned from more of a melee focused game to more of a ranged game. And then if you or your opponent has your cannons positioned just right, the way that grape shot or canister shot or whatever works. It just, one, it can be a lot of fun, but two, it can be very discouraging. Empire is a fun game, but maybe not start there. I've heard a lot of people actually recommend that new players to the Total War series start with Shogun 2.
Okay.
So that is a game set in Japan, and so in some ways it's a smaller campaign map, and it's all kind of like samurai and that era of combat. And so the clan on the southern tip of one island actually has a pretty similar unit roster to a clan from the other side of the island chain, and so kind of a smaller map, a smaller technology tree. And so if you're into samurai, that Shogun 2 Total War is a good place to start. But yeah, I got started with Rome. I love that game. Too bad Rome 2 was not a very good entry in the Total War series. I don't know if anyone here has the same bitterness that I do towards that game.
What is the bitterness? What is the root of the bitterness towards Rome Total War 2?
So the first Rome game was amazing. It was like the perfect version of the Total War series. Talking about diversity in the unit roster, that's another cool thing about the Roman setting, is that you have the Roman legions versus the barbarians in Gaul versus you got the horseman tribes way out to the east. You've got phalanxes in Greece.
And they had elephants in it?
Yeah, Carthage had elephants. And so, it's a great setting for this type of game because you can be growing up your Roman legions and they're just slaughtering barbarians. And then all of a sudden you go against Carthage and there's a shield wall. And then coming in from the side are just 12 very angry elephants that start out in control of the enemy and then just completely lose control and just start wandering around the battle map. And, from a video game, a little bit more arcadey while still actually making sense in the historical context. It's a great setting. Rome 1 was great. And side issue, like artistically, who knows what colors Roman legions actually wore, but in the game you played as red Romans or blue Romans or green Romans. So those were like the starting factions. They're 3 different Roman families, and they just kind of did some hand waving there to decide who the 3 Roman families were. It looked beautiful. The background art for your beautiful red armies marching across the landscape was very unobtrusive. So the textures and stuff from 2004 or whenever that game was made, the hills and the grass is very unobtrusive, and the red legions marching across looked beautiful, or green or blue, whatever you were playing. But then when they went to Rome 2, so I'll start with the artistic complaint first. The artistic complaint is when they went to Rome 2, they did 2 things. One, it was 9 or 10 years in the future, so this came out 2013, so their background detail was much better. The shading and the textures for the grass and the hillsides and the cityscapes and the cobbled roads was much better and much more realistic, so it kind of pulled more focus on your higher resolution computer monitors. You got the 1080p's now. And then with the actual legions, they're like, historically, all these people, they're just soldiers bringing what they have to the battlefield, or what their patrons can equip them with. They're wearing browns, they're wearing tans, they got like some leathers and some dirty cotton shirts, or whatever they're wearing, some wools. So your armies got uglier, the terrain got more detailed, your army just looked ugly. It was just these ugly armies marching towards each other. And then added to that, Rome 2 came out with some serious glitches and flaws, and so it was like your glitchy, ugly armies were wandering towards each other and not behaving right. And Rome 2 was just very well hyped up because people loved the first Rome game so much, and it did not deliver. And supposedly they fixed the glitches since then, but I'll never install Rome 2 Total War again. Maybe someday they'll come out with a 3. But
it's interesting. I was doing a little research prior to the episode, and they've all been done by Creative Assembly as the developer, which is a subsidiary of Sega as of 2005. And Creative Assembly's been around for quite some time. They were founded in 1987. Prior to doing Total War, they primarily made sports games for EA, including rugby, Australian football. They primarily did, from what my research showed, I would call foreign sports sports games. So like they were a British developer, so I guess they just stayed in their like wheelhouse, but it was like cricket, rugby, Australian football. It's just like all these different titles, and they made enough money to allow them to take the big bet and make the originally Total War Shogun, and then or Shogun Total War. As evident by the amount of sequels, it was popular to some degree.
You just made an interesting little verbal tick there. The Total War Shogun versus Shogun Total War. So they started out with the setting first.
Oh yeah.
And then Total War at the end.
Yeah.
And then like halfway through the series, they're like, we're gonna be making a lot of these, aren't they? And so they rebranded to put Total War at the beginning. And then looking at the list here, it went from Napoleon: Total War to Total War: Shogun 2. Made that switch over in 2011, I guess. Yeah, it's still a little awkward, but they've decided to start putting Total War at the beginning now. And yeah, at this point, I'm looking at the list. There's like 10 of these games out now.
Then they have like expansions too.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not only just like it's like nested. You have like all these other games that roll up underneath the one game.
I think most of the expansions actually do work as standalone games, but yeah, some of them they try to market as standalone games that are clearly just coming out a year after the original game and like the same game engine and everything. But yeah, so Rome Total War had Barbarian Invasion as the first expansion, which was kind of late Roman Empire when it was starting to split apart. It also had Alexander, which I guess would have made a fair bit earlier with Alexander starting to go east with his army. But later on, they marketed Napoleon Total War as its own game. I mean, it was very clearly based off of the Empire Total War game engine and everything.
I bought it. I'm a fan of Napoleon, so I pretty much any video game that's about Napoleon I own.
The one nice thing about Empire Total War is that it does have naval battles. They don't all have naval battles, but maybe like a third or a half of these games do have naval battles as part of their thing. So in addition to building up armies, you can also build up fleets. For some of the games, when the fleets meet, they just do the same thing that most of the other 4X games do of just like auto-resolving. Who brought the most high-cost units to this battle? Okay, roll a dice. We'll say this one won by this much. But a few of the games actually zoom in, and in a completely different setup, you have a naval battle. And Empire was one of the ones that did that. And yeah, you bring your third-rate ship of the line. It's still set up so that you can bring 20 units, so it got pretty messy. You can bring 20 third-rate ships of the line up against their India men and their brigs and their first rates and everything. And it was pretty messy and it didn't work well. But I do enjoy games that try to portray Age of Sail, gunpowder based naval combat, and it worked okay. I mean, they had the wind is coming in from this direction, and so you sail better if you're not sailing into the wind, and you can use round shot or chain shot or grape shot. And so it was a good attempt at that kind of game. So, the Total War, I think all of the games have 20 units as the size of an army that you could walk around the campaign map. And for the land-based battles, it's actually a really good size. It makes sense. You get, 10 frontline troops of sword and shield standing out front, and you get 4 or 5 units of bows behind. You got your general's unit, a couple of cavalry, maybe a trebuchet, and it's like the perfect balance and a lot of fun to play at that scale. And every once in a while you'll have 2 armies go out, and so then you'll play with 40 units on your side. But when it gets to naval combat and you're like the goal is to kind of get each ship positioned against each enemy ship at a advantageous angle and everything, that you shouldn't be trying to manage more than 2 or 3 ships against 2 or 3 enemy ships. Like, I understand that Trafalgar was pretty much 20 versus 20, but actually as one human player trying to get everything to line up right, it's just like you get 2 of your ships lined up right, doing pretty well against the enemy, and then you look over and the rest of your fleet's just sinking.
You need like captains to like manage your ships.
Yeah. That would be the time for multiplayer. And so that's a whole other topic. I actually don't have a lot of experience with the Total War games, but like you can play Total War games multiplayer where you like wait for other people to take their turn, or you can just do it like, let's play a battle. Let's play a quick battle. You can do that kind of without the campaign. But no, that'd be a lot of fun for cooperative play, a Total War game where like you each get a couple of ships or each get one ship. That'd be a lot of fun. You brought up like real-time strategy games earlier, and in some ways I find those harder because that's one of those things where you're supposed to be focusing on mining enough gold or minerals or Vespian gas and the micro of, you know, attacking the enemy's base. I find that really hard because it splits the attention, and I don't have the actions per minute on my mouse speed to be able to be efficient at that. But that's something I actually really like about the way that Total War does the battles, is that, okay, your armies meet on the campaign map. For the next 10 minutes, you're not worried about the economy at all. You know, you can't recruit new units during the battle. You just have to use the units that are already there. It's no resource management, just you have this many swordsmen and this many bowmen and try to win the battle now.
So for me, it's kind of like the opposite. When I'm playing like StarCraft, for example, I'm like going down a specific tree, and that's what I'm going to make. So I'm going to be like, I'm going to start the game, I'm going to be like, I'm going to make as many battle cruisers as I can, like from the get-go. That's my decision. And then I dedicate, I have like a defensive strategy, I get enough resources, then I just start churning out battle cruisers. Like that's like how I play. And it could be a different unit, but I generally try to do that. But then I'd come over to the Total War series and I try that strategy again. And let me tell you, 20 units of elephants doesn't work the same way as having a diverse group of units and understanding how units interact with each other. Because I definitely played one of the roams where I had like just oops all elephants as like my force, and it was bad. I think I won some contests, mostly because it was just like a disaster zone, because it's just like, oh, you have 20 units of elephants, each unit of elephants, there's X number of elephants per units, there's like, you know, could be close to 100 elephants like just swarming this map. And I would lose. There'd be like, you're just chaos. I feel like we spent a lot of time talking about the Total War category that people don't want us to talk about, especially with you on the podcast.
It's time, isn't it?
So Total War got a license, and that license was Warhammer, and they have produced not only Total War Warhammer, but they have also now made Total War Warhammer 2, and there's going to be a Total Warhammer 3 is coming soon.
I think 3 is like early 2022.
So for those who are new to Warhammer, there's Warhammer 40K, and then there's Warhammer, which is now called Warhammer Age of Sigmar.
Yeah, so in some ways there's 3. So Warhammer Fantasy is fantasy setting. You got your totally not Tolkien dwarves and elves and all that stuff. And then they do, start borrowing from other places. You got your lizard mans and your dark elves and a bunch of factions kind of like that. Orcs, totally not Tolkien orcs. And yeah, so it's fantasy, kind of Iron Age, kind of, mixed in some magic. The dwarves have gunpowder. One of the human factions has a little bit of gunpowder.
And it's like gothic Iron Age, isn't it? It's like a little, like the unit stylization, especially like the older miniatures were very kind of like gothic.
I think it depended on the faction. But yeah, it's Warhammer Fantasy is a miniature-based tabletop war game. And the way it works is you and some friends decide who is collecting and playing each faction. So if Billy's going to be dwarfs, that means somebody's got to be elves, and maybe I'll play the human faction, the Empire faction. Each of those factions belongs to this fantasy world, and the map for Warhammer Fantasy looks kind of like a messed up version of the actual world. So there's sort of North America, Central America, South America, sort of Africa in there, but they put their various fantasy races around the old world, they called it. And you mentioned Age of Sigmar. So in the 2013-2014, Warhammer Fantasy was selling very poorly, and Games Workshop, which is the company that makes it, made an executive decision to just say that Chaos won the war. The Chaos demons screaming in from the netherworld, they destroyed the world, they won. And so that was their excuse to do a reboot. And so the kind of more fantasy, magic, old-timey setting of Warhammer is now called Age of Sigmar. So I'm not even sure what the whole lore is, but yeah, Warhammer Fantasy got got destroyed. The tabletop game of Warhammer Fantasy is no more. They wrote a new rule book for Age of Sigmar. And one of the big things they did is they went from square bases for this tabletop game to round bases. So it used to be very much like rectangles of troops going up against rectangles of other troops.
Yeah.
And then you roll the dice to see who wins when they meet up on the table. But they went to a game that's more, call it like skirmish style. So it's loose clusters of 5 or 10 miniatures on round bases meeting up against other units of similar style.
Like, is it more of like a zoomed in version of like a Warhammer game? Would you say that like Classic was a little bit pulled back more? You'd have like more troops on the field and you'd group them up?
I think that may be the case. There did seem to be the artistic decision to go with bigger, more flashier models, which mostly means fewer of them. But yeah, so when I got started in Warhammer, and you mentioned the other type, which is
40K.
Warhammer 40,000, set in the year 40,000, grimdark future, and none of that applies to the Total War series right now.
It should.
Someday. So yeah, there is a far future sci-fi version of Warhammer, which is Warhammer 40K. And then in the fantasy setting, there's Warhammer Fantasy, which they just nuked the tabletop game, just said Chaos won, there is no more Warhammer Fantasy. They pulled all that stuff off the shelves. They reboxed some of it with round bases instead of square bases. And they started selling Warhammer Age of Sigmar. What's interesting is that Total War, Creative Assembly, Total War got the license to Warhammer, and even after Warhammer Age of Sigmar was what was being sold for the tabletop, they made a game, Warhammer Fantasy, of the set in the old world with all the factions from pre-2013-14. So yeah, one of the things that the tabletop game did was, in their kind of complete rebrand, they took the factions that they couldn't copyright as easily. So they took Bretonnia, was a faction of French chivalry, and they said, we cannot copyright knights. So they just abandoned that faction entirely and made up the Sigmarites, a race of godly reincarnated spirits inside giant golden armor. Not that that's a one-to-one replacement, but they're kind of going through, and for their dwarf faction, they had a faction that was very much love to hang out in mine and make runes kind of dwarfs, and very, very Tolkien, very recognizable as D&D or Tolkien dwarfs. In their rebrand, they're like, okay, one of the units we had from before was dwarf slayers, which are essentially naked dwarfs who dye their hair orange and go around with giant axes trying to kill trolls. Yeah, we can try to
It's now a race of them.
trademark that. Yeah. and so they just got rid of the dwarves that are, heavy armor with their hammers and their grudges. And so Age of Sigmar on the tabletop is newer IP, trying to get farther away from kind of the Tolkien inspiration. But in the video game, Creative Assembly got Warhammer Fantasy video game. So in the old world, they've got their dwarves and their heavy armor. They've got their Bretonnian knights riding around the battlefield. And so I'll say it right now, the mix of Total War and Warhammer, I think, is an amazing combination. It goes together perfectly. So when I was in middle school and high school, me and my friends, we did pick, you're going to be dwarfs, you're going to be elves. I was orcs. Orcs was my faction. And yeah, we'd paint up all these minis, and back then it was square bases. So you're putting rectangles of troops onto the tabletop, and you use a ruler to move them towards each other. It's a turn-based game. When one unit's shooting at another with their little bows and arrows or rock lavas, or when two units actually meet up, then you start rolling piles of dice to determine who lives and who dies. And those games took hours and hours and hours. So I come at all this. I really do like painting miniatures, and I love that part of things. But I actually don't enjoy the tabletop game very much. It's like it's the framework and the excuse to collect and paint miniatures, and some of my friends do enjoy it, and so it's an excuse to hang out with them. But I don't find any of the rules very interesting. I don't find the process of standing around for 6 hours to resolve 4 turns of units moving towards each other. I don't find it as fun as other people do, but I am part of that hobby because I like the painting sides of things. But if you just have a computer do all of the rules, the action of 2 armies running towards each other and chopping at each other and shooting arrows and all of that stuff can be done by the computer in 5 minutes. You can resolve a battle in 5 minutes, and so you get all of the spectacle of all of these really interesting, unique units. There's still the naked dwarfs with their orange hair. They're still running around next to the thunderers and everything. And so there's the spectacle there, but all of the rolling of dice, that's all done by the computer. And of course there's other like rules resolution issues that I prefer to be done by the computer too. Anytime you're playing on the tabletop, you're measuring with a ruler, and so you get arguments about whether this unit is able to charge this unit. This unit can charge 8 inches, and this is 8 inches. You liar, that's 8.5 inches. Right. That's 8.25 inches. You can't. Well, maybe that guy can, but this guy on the other edge of the rectangle, he's 10 inches away. You don't tell me that he's going to be in base to base con. Or there's a bush here. There's a bush here. That bush is blocking line of sight. No, it's not. I can see his elbow clearly from here. If I take a laser pointer from this guy's bow, I can definitely see the elbow on that guy.
Isn't that the joy of wargaming, though?
I mean, that's what wargaming is. Some people like it more than others, and some people have the social skills to deal with those interactions better than other people. I don't have those skills. Like I try to get along with people, and so when it comes down to is that 8 inches or slightly more than 8 inches or slightly less than 8 inches, I can't handle that. I can't handle resolving that. Resolving that kind of social conflict. Like if the game is determined based on who backs down the soonest about a measurement or a line of sight issue, I like it when the computer tells me whether that arrow hit or not, or the computer tells me this unit of 80 goblins is shooting at this unit of trolls, and this is did a troll fall down or not. I like the computer doing all that stuff for me. That's nice.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Brent, but the games probably also offer kind of an accessibility that's not always there with the
Yes.
tabletop, where, not to beat around the bush, but Warhammer can be an expensive hobby. And
yeah.
it might be in someone's budget to maybe buy a $60 PC game versus putting down a couple hundreds and hundreds into a war game over years. You've probably seen the interest in wargaming expand, but just kind of because of that accessibility.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge monetary and time investment to get started with tabletop games, especially the full-sized war games. The number of models that you need to buy, put together, spray paint, that's a lot of time and money. From some points of views, that makes it this hobby that you can dive into and get really into and really make it your main hobby.
Right, yeah.
For a little bit of time, because I like computer gaming, for a little bit of time, my hobby was building a PC. And so you spend all your time researching on, graphics cards and processors and everything, and, searching Newegg and finding the deals and finding the optimum builds and reading the Reddit posts. And then you buy your parts and you build your PC. And then that hobby,
It's over.
it's kind of, yeah. And then you build a lesser version for your TV computer, and then it's over.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And then 4 years down the line, you buy a new graphics card or whatever. But that's a hobby that has a very definite endpoint. And so there's something to be said for a hobby that just goes on and on and on, and you will never finish painting this army. But it's good to have goals.
I think that's pretty interesting, though, that the wargaming hobby brought you to essentially the sub hobby of painting miniatures. If there was no games to have miniatures for, you wouldn't really paint miniatures, right?
That's probably true. So now the hobby of miniature painting is its own
Right.
thing, and there are plenty of miniatures that are sold just as display pieces. And then in addition, there's a whole lot more types of games that you can use minis for. So there's, the big war games like Warhammer or Kings of War, or, something like that, Bolt Action. But there's also a lot of smaller skirmish games. And so if you're at all interested in miniature wargaming, miniature games, tabletop games, find a local store and ask about skirmish games, because those are games where you can get like 5 miniatures and play some games with, and that might be a better on-ramp than trying to start a massive army for Warhammer. But yeah, my story was I had friends back in middle school who said, we're doing this. I can't remember who even started it, but somebody said, we're doing this. And so, all right, I guess if we're doing this, we're doing this. And yeah, throughout that process of trying to play games, ended up getting into painting. And so that's, for me, painting is my hobby. And then, these games are kind of the excuse and the framework to paint. But the setting of these games, it turns out, is perfect for a Total War game, because there are these unique, distinct factions of, these different fantasy races, and they each have their different tech trees and their, distinct units. And one faction has a rock lava, one is lobbing actual live goblins at the enemy, one is shooting cannons, one is ballista.
Yeah.
What race is your chosen? Are you still an orc guy?
I've played some orcs. So I've actually played most of them in the Total War Warhammer games. This week I was playing some dwarfs, and so dwarfs are very slow, they're stumpy, they've got good armor, but they're supposed to sit back, and it's in some ways they're a little bit boring, but you gotta get enough dwarf warriors to hold the line while you get as many crossbow dwarfs, the quarrelers in the back lines to really take out the enemy. Couple of grudge throwers to lob those rocks long distances. Dwarfs also have gunpowder, so you can use the thunderers, which are like the rifle dwarfs or the cannons, but those are there's a little bit of a glitchiness in whether or not you get line of sight on some of the more direct fire like rifles and stuff, whereas the arrows curve up and over front lines, so a little more glitchiness on some of the units. And so some of the games do have like bugs that can be exploited to make sure that you win various battles, and that's a little bit of the learning curve on these games too, is like knowing that if you just sit back and shoot at the enemies on the walls, they're just going to stand on the walls and take the fire. So the way to storm the castle is to use up all of your ammunition while the enemy's just standing there doing nothing on the walls. Or, there's little exploits like that, but I think that's part of every game, and
how the classic game
normally they're fun, or you can make them be fun.
Do you have a favorite Warhammer Fantasy race?
Yeah, I mean, in the game, the lizard men are a lot of fun. These are the essentially dinosaurs. Some of them are humanoid dinosaurs, and some of them are just straight up, that's a Tyrannosaurus Rex that a humanoid dinosaur is riding. So yeah, there's a lot of dinosaurs riding dinosaurs. That's the gimmick for that race. But you were talking about trying to build an army that's all elephants. This is a situation where you can build an army that is all T-Rexes. Go up against an army of 3,000 rat folk or whatever with your 20 T-Rexes. Maybe some of your T-Rexes have riders, some of your T-Rexes don't have riders, but yeah. So yeah, the really fun thing about the Warhammer version of Total War is that there are these crazy units that Rome didn't have, and the samurai didn't have. They didn't have Tyrannosaurus Rexes, they didn't have gyrocopters and all that stuff. They didn't have the pterodactyls that drop fire bombs on people. And it's kind of amazing that all does work in the Total War game engine. So part of it's the same. It is the rectangles of troops going up against each other, and that all works just the same as it ever did. And so that's actually a very faithful adaptation of the tabletop Warhammer Fantasy to the Total War game. But yeah, then there's the giant Tyrannosaurus Rex that will just run into a block of 160 Skaven of 160 rat men and just the animation's actually pretty great of just the Tyrannosaurus Rex chomping him in half and chucking him all over the place, and the nice, neat block of Ratmen just gets scattered all over the place, and some of them are able to make it back into formation. Some of them are just, bloody messes on the ground.
I think it's an interesting point, though, that like Total War Warhammer and Total War Warhammer 2 are very different than the rest of their catalog, since the rest of the catalog is historical. However, they've been in pretty much the same game engine since the
True.
since Empire Total War. They were in the Total War Engine 3, which they've updated to 64-bit, but realistically, they've been in the same kind of same ecosystem of what they build with since going on 10 years now. It's interesting that they can do the Warhammer kind of outlandish stuff that is in Warhammer in the same engine that they do standard Napoleon troops.
Yeah, and it's remarkable that it actually does work pretty well. And it most of the time, I play the battles in a fairly zoomed out version so that my camera can see most of my blocks of troops on the screen at once, or I'll zoom in to, maybe 5 units at once to make sure that little fight's going right. But if you're willing to take the time, you can zoom all the way in to individuals hacking it out. And some of the animations are actually pretty fun to watch of, individual troops whacking at each other and one of them falls down, or again, with the dinosaurs of people getting bit in half or whatever. And if you're playing the game kind of more on the tactical level where you're zoomed out a little bit and make sure that, this unit's flanking this unit and this unit's holding the line here and nobody's getting behind your artillery over here, you miss a lot of that stuff. But if you are willing to trust that everybody's in the right place, you can zoom in and watch some of these fights, and it's not perfect, but the engine does a pretty good job of making it kind of cinematic if you want it to be.
Is there heroes in the Warhammer version?
Yeah, there are.
Are there heroes in other versions, or is Warhammer the only one with hero characters?
Other versions do have heroes. Yeah, I think the entire time they've had general units, and
right.
So in Rome it was your general is represented by 24 heavy cavalry or something, which actually do a great job at flanking and attacking the enemy from the rear and winning the battle. But then it's basically a random number generator. If some of those cavalrymen start to die, it's just random luck whether it's your general from that unit that dies. And so, which is actually kind of fun. If you can charge your general unit at a block of spearmen, and maybe they eventually win the fight, and 6 of your general's bodyguard rides away and your general's fine, and he levels up and he does better on the campaign map, and next fight he has more armor or attack stat or whatever. Or maybe just when they charge the spearman, he might just be the first one to die, and it'll pop up your general has died, and then your whole army takes a morale hit. It's more likely to run away. And if you do eventually resolve the battle and end up back on the campaign map, it'll just be your general will be dead, and you need to send out a new family member to lead that army, or you need to promote some poor captain to lead that army. But especially in the recent games, they have gotten more into heroes where your general is one character, is one, sometimes just infantry-sized unit running around, and the number of hit points that this character have will be very outlandish, especially in the Warhammer version. And you can just have your general in the front line, the very front line, just fighting 3 blocks of enemies, and you can rely that he's probably going to be okay for a couple of minutes while you do some other stuff on the battlefield.
Right. And they incorporate magic too and stuff.
They do. Yeah, you can throw fireballs and call down rain of arcane fire from the skies and everything, and some of that's pretty annoying actually. If you have your army all nice and in a rain, and all of a sudden just one of your units lights up and it goes from 80 men to 13, and you're just bodies everywhere. That's not fun.
Yeah.
You didn't even let me see the rocks flying from the trebuchets on the other side of the map. You didn't give me a chance to dodge.
Do you spend a lot of time customizing all of your armies as kind of almost like painting, except digitally?
As far as I know, you can't do that. So that
Oh,
is
that's sad.
the major strike against this game. So the old Dawn of War game, at least Dawn of War 1 was a Warhammer 40K game, but one of the things you could do was paint your units basically. It was like a
Yeah.
real-time strategy game, but there was a feature where you could go in and say, okay, my armor color is going to be this, my trim color is going to be this, and my secondary trim color is going to be this. And that would actually go and put those colors on those units in your game. And that was great.
They should do that.
They should. That was a major miss. It would make it the perfect game if,
Yeah,
if that
yeah.
was an option. Yeah, that would be amazing. But no, the artists who made each of these factions, they picked their favorite colors for the factions and locked them in, and there you go. Oh well,
It's very sad.
it is.
Yeah, I will write to Creative Assembly. We'll tag them and we'll
Yeah.
tell them that they need to change it for the next one.
It is actually interesting that they decided to make 3 Warhammer games. So each game has more factions from the old Warhammer Fantasy universe in it. So, first game left out the elves. It had orcs and dwarfs and chaos and stuff, but it left out the elves. And then the second game, they introduced the elves and the lizard people. And then the third game, I actually don't know exactly what factions they're releasing because they already have most of the factions in the game after the first, Warhammer 1 and Warhammer 2 for Total War. But yeah, no, I was actually impressed by the audacity of saying we're going to release 3 games with this IP, and they're actually doing it. And both 1 and 2 are very good games, especially 2. One thing about any like 4X game is that the late game can be pretty boring. Like the early game for Civilization or Galactic Civilizations 2, let's say, is a lot of fun of trying to get your foothold, get some advantages over your neighbors and start winning some fights. Through the middle game, it can be challenging and fun, but once you get into late game, you're the biggest civilization, you have the best economy, you
Yeah,
have the
right,
best,
yeah.
most leveled up armies. The computer cheats a little bit and puts some high level armies out there for you to fight against, but you're gonna win. There's a certain point once you're, 100 turns in or whatever, and you've gone from 1 province to 50 provinces, like, yeah, you're gonna win, and there's gonna be some fun along the way, and you'll have some vendettas against Bretonians or whatever, the Britons, those Spaniards are gonna come for you eventually with their bull warriors. Yeah. But the late game can get a bit boring. But actually, the Total War games have found decent ways to add like a fun twist to the late game. So like Rome 1, like I said, you start out as one of the 3 Roman families, and then you fight barbarians until all of a sudden the other Roman families turn on you, and so then you're fighting against the rest of Rome, which is like kind of the final challenge near the end of the game.
Oh, I like that. That's fun.
Yeah, no, it is. And Shogun 2 Total War, the objective is to become the Shogun of Japan. And once you reach a certain size, like once you've conquered 20% or 25% of Japan, all of a sudden the rest of Japan turns against you. Every other clan like unites against you, and then there's objectives to cement yourself as the Shogun after the rest of Japan unites against you. And some of the games do it better than others, kind of dealing with this late game problem. But Warhammer 2 Total War had this mechanic that was like a race mechanic. So the 3 of the other top factions in the game are racing against you to complete rituals. And so you kind of at set points during the game, you can say start a ritual, and you need to complete like 4 rituals before the other big factions complete those 4 rituals. And the thing is, once you hit start ritual, the computer will send like 5 massive chaos armies against you. And so it's kind of a fun way to keep the game challenging all the way until the end. And it is a hard challenge, like in any of these 4X games. Yeah, late game can get kind of, I mean, you're winning, and it's fun, and then all of a sudden it becomes boring to be winning so much because you just, yeah, I won, but I still have to conquer the rest of the world, sort of thing.
With late game, I think we've talked about Total War a lot.
Give it a shot, give it a shot. Yeah.
So there's definitely a lot of Total War talk that was had. I do have a question for you though, Brent. Your first war game that you played was Total War Rome. Do you remember your first video game?
It might have been a Game Boy game. I mean, it might have been like Tetris or something like that. Yeah, that would have been pretty early on. Yeah, no, I mean, I did have a birthday where I got the original Game Boy
Oh, sweet. The
Nice.
big brick model.
Yep, the gray one, And for a little while, I played with the Game Genie, the giant attachment that went on the top. I don't know if you remember that, but there was like it was a large
had a little book
attachment
inside of it, right? Like I remember my friend had it for the Game Boy, and it had a little cabinet that you can open. It has a little book inside with all the codes.
Oh my, yes it did. Yes it did. It made the Game Boy not quite double in size, but it added a lot of mass to the Game Boy. It slotted into the game slot on the top, but it was also like an extra 2 inches on the top of the Game Boy, and then you put the game into the Game Genie on top, and that configuration sucked batteries like nothing else. So in order to put a cheat code to give yourself infinite lives on Mario, you were holding a very heavy object and consuming a lot of battery life.
It was worth it, though, if you got to get those infinite lives.
Man, thinking back on that now, these were small modifications to the game. In order to essentially play on a different difficulty setting, you needed to massively upgrade your system there.
I did want to mention briefly that my obsession with Napoleon stems from a war game, and that war game is Fields of Glory, which is a 1993 Microprose game that was a Napoleon war game, and it is good. I don't know if it holds up graphically, but you can play Battle of Waterloo, where you can play as Napoleon, and you can go up against Wellington, and all of a sudden 4 million Prussians show up.
Oh, yeah.
Whenever I played Waterloo, I would always take my troops and I would find Wellington, and he'd be hiding up on a hill, and I'd send my all my cavalry up along the side, and they would just go to kill Wellington. That was my objective, was just murder Wellington from the beginning, and then then they just replace him with some other random British guy. But
I do like that the units in this game, I'm looking at a screenshot, they have to be 3 pixels tall. I'm looking at red coats, and they are solid 3 colors: black, red, white, and that's it.
Yeah, I'm looking at the same picture here, but actually in some ways this is kind of beautiful. Again, it's the background isn't detracting from anything. It's just pale green in the background, and then very, very colorful armies. Of course, that's one reason to like Napoleonics too, is because they just put on red jackets and marched around in the open. It probably looked pretty sweet. Yeah.
That's how you could tell who's your enemy, is what color they were wearing.
This is one of those games, though, that when it was released, I'm looking at the cover, they definitely just stole a Renaissance painting, not Renaissance painting, but a painting from that time period. We're this is free.
Zach, do not speak ill of Fields of Glory. You can actually, in the game, you can station your troops into buildings as well. And I learned about making infantry units squares to fight against cavalry units. That's where I learned about that strategy, was from Fields of Glory. You have to bring your units into a small little square together, tightly packed square, to fight cavalry. But
can't flank a square. Yeah.
So, final question before we move into our byweight pass. Your YouTube channel is Goobertown Hobbies.
Mm-hmm.
Where did Goobertown Hobbies come from, and how did you become mayor?
I mean, a goober, it's got a couple of definitions. I mean, funny peanut is one definition, but a goober, I was always taught that a goober is a kind of a nerd that looks at their shoes a lot, like an affable nerd, a nerd, but not in the bad way, not like an incel nerd, but kind of a nice nerd. And it's kind of that crossed with a little bit of a Keebler elf kind of thing. So Goobertown is, man, in some ways it's almost like Santa's village, just a bunch of happy little dudes crafting gifts and stuff. So I don't know. I just ended up using the word goober a lot with my friends. Just be see what Seth was doing? Yeah, what a goober. But no, I ended up using the word goober a lot, and ended up making a channel name called Goobertown Hobbies. So that's just where I put my painting videos. I found out in the meantime that there's a Goobertown in Arkansas, and
Oh,
it's
that's fun.
like a kind of a small township or unincorporated township or something like that. You know, as my YouTube channel has grown, I think it's kind of funny that the search engine optimization for anyone who lives in Goobertown, Arkansas, has just like gone to hell. Like if you run the one stop party shop in Goobertown, Arkansas, and you're like trying to get people to make the drive from neighboring towns, and your Google search results just keep going lower and lower and lower. Anytime then someone searches Goobertown, like my idiot face on a thumbnail for a video pops up. Like in some ways it's mean, but in some ways it's pretty funny.
Somebody just wants to put out their trash and just looks at Goobertown and just can't get to the town website because it's just all your videos.
So I mean, my channel's I don't know, recently turned like 3 years old, but luckily it does keep growing at a steady pace here. So I gotta think the people who live in Goobertown, Arkansas, are just like their search results are just getting messed up and messed up and messed up. And if I'm ever within a 4 or 5 hour drive of Goobertown, Arkansas, I'll make the pilgrimage, get the Instagram photo in front of the town sign, in front of the town hall, like in front of the supermarket, the gas station.
So we're going to come to the end of our show where we just talk about games that are coming out that we are excited about buy, waiting, or passing. For those who are listening to the show regularly, we did change our format for this, but because we have a guest on, we're not going to subject the guest to random games that we decided to pull out of a hat. So instead, we went back to our old format where we just individually picked our games that we were excited about buy, waiting, or passing on. So Brent, as the guest, and it's a time-honored tradition on this podcast, you can go first. In what game are you excited about buying, waiting, or passing on?
Okay. I literally could not think of a game outside of the Total War series that I'm excited about in the near future. I don't play enough to really be abreast of everything that's coming out, and that's okay. It saves me money. But Total War Warhammer 3, that is an instant buy for me, so I'll get that on release. And I have not gotten the Total War 3 Kingdoms yet, so that's kind of the Dynasty Warriors version of Total War, or the ancient China / mythology of ancient China Total War game. And so that's one I'm waiting for that to hit $20 on Steam sale. Now, we were talking about the fall Steam sale, the autumn Steam sale. It was at $35. Probably not going to hit $20 during the winter sale, but hey, maybe summer sale 2022.
Look at that. You got to buy and a wait. There we go. Zach, what are you excited to buy, wait, or pass on?
Yeah, so the game that I'm excited about buy, waiting, or passing on is Beyond the Edge of Owlsguard, which is being developed by a company called Watch the Toast, and it's due out in June of next year. It's set in a world that's about to be annihilated by machines, and you must save it. It's inspired by like 1990s point and click games from what it looks like, especially those of the Microprose style of point and click games, as well as the LucasArts style of point and click games. But it does kind of give me a vibe of like Dragon Sphere, Return of the Phantom, but it has anthropomorphic animals in it because it's also inspired by classic animated movies of the like Disney variety. So it's all about talking animals, trying to save the world from machines. I'll probably put it down as a buy. I've been wanting to play more adventure games, and I'd be willing to give this one a shot. I like the idea of it, and I like the art style that they're going for. So yeah, that's Beyond the Edge of Owlsguard, due out in June of 2022.
Awesome.
What about you, Seth?
I'm excited about a game that's coming out on December 6th. This is The President, which is being developed by Superpack, which I think is a fun name for a developer who's building a political thriller. So you play as the President of the United States, and you are also trying to escape from your previous crimes while being president. So you need to essentially manipulate and abuse the position of being president so that you can profit. I personally, as someone who was a political scientist in college and really appreciate political thriller type games and enjoy those type of political choice grand strategy games like Democracy or Suzerain, I think there's one, but Suzerain is a like you're like leading like a dystopic type of like you're like a despot of like a second world country. If this is the president, you get to be a despot of a first world country, which is I'm excited about. So I'm gonna put this down as a buy since I like these type of games and tend to play them. So with that, we once again would like to thank Brent for being on the show.
Yeah, absolutely.
We really appreciate it. I've always really enjoyed your YouTube content. Personally, I was sad when it because you went quiet for a little while, right?
I had a couple months where I wasn't putting out videos. I forgot to publish for a couple of months. I was just kind of working in the background.
But I think it was like the unboxing, and I was like, man, I haven't seen Brent stuff in a while. I'm so excited that I'm like, this is great. I personally, my favorite series of yours is your random dice rolling for determining theme.
Goobertown roulette. Paint a random roulette. Mini and a random paint scheme. Yeah.
Oh, it's my favorite series. I don't think you ever get the combination that I want to see painted.
Someday.
But I just got to keep watching.
That's right. Well, no, I love the podcast, guys. Thanks for having me on. We had a good talk here, didn't we?
It was great to have you on. So for those who are listening, go find Brent on YouTube at Goobertown Hobbies. You can also find him in his podcast,
Paint Bravely the Podcast. Or if you like D&D, we've got a campaign going on the 20-Sided Realms podcast.
Check all that out. Give him a subscribe, listen, follow, watches. Zach, do you want to wrap for us?
If you need to get in touch with us, you can email us at classicgamingbrothers@gmail.com. Also check out our website, classicgamingbrothers.com. You can contact us also through our social media. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter. Facebook and Instagram, Classic Gaming Brothers. Twitter is CG Brothers Pod. And if you want to support us, as always, give us a like, give us a follow, share the podcast, let people know, ring bells, do all those things. And we'll be happy to hear from you. Seth, am I forgetting anything?
Don't play games like my brother.
And don't play games like my brother.
Don't play games like my brothers.
I've been Seth.
And I've been Zach.
And I've been Brent.
And we've been the Classic Gaming Brothers. And Brent. That's right. All right. So now we begin the real podcast
where we talk about
celebrity deathmatch.